Good day, everyone. Welcome. I'm Dr. Romel Bataclan, and we're going to work through one of the most clinically relevant topics that you will encounter, which is the urinary tract infections. UTI is the most common bacterial infection in the outpatient medicine and even sometimes in the inpatient or in the wards. You will see this every single day in their clinic, in the emergency room, in wards, in your residency, regardless of what specialty you pursue or regardless of what career in medicine that you will choose. Understanding, therefore, urinary tract infections is not optional. By the end of this day, I want you to be able to walk into any clinical encounter involving urinary tract infections and know exactly what to ask, what to order, and what to prescribe using the current Philippine context. So, at the end of this lecture, I hope that you'll able to define and classify different kinds of urinary tract infections. Second, identify the pathophysiology, common organisms, and the risk factors. Third, you should be able to recognize various clinical presentations, particularly acute cystitis, pyelonephritis, and asymptomatic bacteriuria. Fourth, to apply certain diagnostic algorithms that are available for evaluation and workup of urinary tract infections. The fifth objective is to select the appropriate empiric antibiotic therapy based on the latest clinical practice guidelines and the updated resistance data. Six is to manage urinary tract infection in special populations, particularly pregnancy, elderly, and complicated cases. And finally, recognize and manage urinary tract obstruction because there are cases of urinary tract obstruction that can lead or manifest as urinary tract infection. So, what is UTI? At its core, urinary tract infection is the invasion and multiplication of microorganisms in the urinary tract, causing inflammations and symptoms attributable to the urinary system. We classify UTI in two main ways, by location and by complexity. By location, it's divided into two. The lower urinary tract infection that would include cystitis or the infection of the urinary bladder and urethritis, which is the infection of the ureters. Upper UTI, meanwhile, would include the infection of the kidney, particularly pyelonephritis and renal abscess. By complexity, and this distinction will drive your entire management decision. There are two types also, uncomplicated and complicated. Uncomplicated UTI occurs in a non-pregnant woman with no structural or functional abnormality. Think of, for example, a 25-year-old female presenting with dysuria and urgency. Complicated UTI, meanwhile, involves either structural anomaly, presence of urinary catheter, diabetes mellitus, immunosuppressive states, and male patients. It's always complicated in male patients. So, as you can see here in the lower part of the slide, you can, there are various risk factors that can be defined as those having complicated urinary tract infection. So the the acronym would be MIS complicated. So UTI in males, except in males presenting with isolated lower urinary tract symptoms, immunosuppression, sepsis, presence of an indwelling Foley catheter, obstructive uropathy, multi-drug resistant organisms, post-operative scenarios, the uncommon or unusual pathogens, presence of impaired voiding or neurogenic bladder, chemical radiation, injuries of the uroepithelium, so these are cancer patients, azotemia or those with elevated serum creatinine, those who underwent renal transplant, this diseases that manifest with incomplete bladder emptying and diabetes mellitus. So now let's understand how urinary tract infections happen. So as you would read in Harrison's, there's an interplay of the host factors, the environmental factors, and the microbial factors. So the most common route in urinary tract infection is the ascending route, which is the bacteria colonize the periurethral area, ascend into the urethra and bladder, adhere to the urothelium, it multiply, causing inflammation and multiplication of the microorganisms, and in certain cases, it goes up to the kidneys that would lead to pyelonephritis. So this is why women are much more susceptible in urinary tract infection because their urethra is only 4 centimeters long compared to 20 centimeters in men, and it is much more closer to the perianal area. So this anatomical difference accounts for a significant portion of the female preponderance of urinary tract infection. Still, the most common organism would be E. coli, which accounts to 80 to 85% of UTIs. Staphylococcus saprophyticus would be second at around 5 to 15%. This is usually associated among sexually active young women. And then the rest would be Klebsiella, Proteus, and Enterococcus. As mentioned, no, so the interplay of the three factors would come in here. So we mentioned the anatomical short urethra among female patients, sexual activity or new partners. So multiple sexual partners can also introduce infections in the not just in the reproductive tract but also because of its close proximity in the urinary tract the microorganism can also enter the urinary tract. Use of spermicides can affect the vaginal ecology. It affects the normal flora, therefore it can overwhelm that normal flora and leads to a pathologic bacterial infection in the urinary tract. Pregnancy, there are physiologic changes that happens during pregnancy which makes it more susceptible to development of urinary tract infections. Immunosuppressive states, definitely because of a much more lower immune system, particularly those also with diabetics, are also very prone and susceptible to urinary tract infections. Presence of urinary tract obstruction, which leads to delayed or incomplete emptying of the urine in the body. So that serves as a nidus also of growth for microorganisms. Presence of indwelling catheters or any foreign objects in the urinary tract also allows a nidus for multiplication and growth of microorganisms in the urinary tract and those with previous history of the urinary tract infection as well. So this is a diagnostic algorithm that is based on the clinical practice guidelines in which was developed in 2013, which is still used now. The updated clinical practice guidelines mostly deals with the updated antibiotic management and other diagnostic workup, but the algorithm still remains the same, particularly for females. So let's go through this um, algorithm. So let's say, for example, we have a 22-year-old female. Last menstrual period was 2 weeks ago, and the patient complained of dysuria and hematuria. So based on that history, so you would ask, is the patient pregnant? So definitely the patient's last menstrual period was 2 weeks ago. So no, so the patient is not pregnant. But if you're suspecting that the patient is pregnant, you have to do a pregnancy test, do some confirmatory test, and you treat the patient as a UTI in pregnancy. Now, you would ask if the patient had previous history of urinary tract infections recently. Um, let's say for this patient, the patient did not have any previous episodes, and these urinary symptoms only happened for the first time. So if there are no previous episodes, particularly 2 episodes in the past year, so it is not a recurrent UTI. But more than twice in the previous year or in the past 12 months, you have to treat the patient as recurrent UTI, which we will also discuss later. And then are there the risk factors of the complicated UTI? Those that I've enumerated in the previous slide. So if yes, you have to do urinalysis and culture and start an empiric treatment, which we will also enumerate later on, and treat the patient as having complicated UTI. Does the patient have flank pain or fever? If yes, the patient should be treated as an acute pyelonephritis. But based on our history, the patient did not have any flank pain nor fever. And then the next question would be presence of vaginal discharge. For this patient, the patient did not have any vaginal discharge. But in case the patient has vaginal discharge, the probability that it is a urinary tract infection is much lower. Therefore, you have to do other tests. You have to do pelvic exam, work up for sexually transmitted infections, and also perform urinalysis and urine culture as well. Since our patient doesn't have any vaginal discharge and the patient only has clear um, urinary symptoms, particularly the dysuria and the hematuria, so you treat the patient as having an acute uncomplicated cystitis. You don't need to even to do a urinalysis, and you can start already empiric treatment, which we will also discuss probably I think in the next slide. But first, we will discuss the other aspects that we mentioned in the algorithm. So UTI in pregnancy is requires your full attention because you're dealing with two lives here, which is the mother and the fetus. So asymptomatic bacteriuria is a very common problem no, among pregnant women. It is defined as more than 100,000 colony forming units per ml in two consecutive midstream urine cultures in which the patient doesn't have any symptoms. So it's because in pregnancy, asymptomatic bacteriuria carries around a 20 to 30% risk of progression to pyelonephritis compared to only 1 to 2% among non-pregnant women. Pyelonephritis in pregnancy is associated with preterm birth and low birth weight. So these are outcomes we absolutely don't want to happen and we want to prevent it. The clinical practice guidelines mandates the screening of all pregnant women between the 9th to 17th week age of gestation, preferably in the 4th month. The gold standard still is urine culture, not the dipstick or not the routine urinalysis, because the sensitivity for this test is insufficient. And then it's very important that in the culture, again, if it satisfies this cutoff, you treat it even if the patient doesn't have any urinary symptoms because you want to reduce pyelonephritis that leads to the preterm birth and low birth weight. So, what are the usual antibiotics that could be safe for this and effective? The cephalosporins, cephalexin, and cefuroxime would be a good choice and very practical since they're readily available, and also fosfomycin as well. And you give it for 7 days. Follow up with repeat culture for 1 week after the treatment and every trimester just to check if the bacteriuria has resolved. So this is very important, and that would also determine if what would be a more preferred antibiotic that can be given for this patient. But you have to consider if that antibiotic would have any negative teratogenic effects, or the patient may have other comorbidities that would make that antibiotic contraindicated in as a management for the infection. There are some pregnant women that would have urinary symptoms, frequency, urgency, dysuria with or without hematuria. So that is still called acute cystitis, similar to a acute uncomplicated cystitis in non-pregnant women. Remember, versus acute pyelonephritis, acute cystitis doesn't have fever nor flank pain or costovertebral angle tenderness on physical examination. Again, you have to, unlike acute uncomplicated cystitis in non-pregnant women, you have to obtain pre-treatment urine culture insensitivity. And still, you have to treat them for 7 days with safe antibiotics. And similarly to asymptomatic bacteriuria, after 1 to 2 weeks, you also perform a post-treatment urine culture. So again, it's cephalexin, cefuroxime, cefexime, fosfomycin. You can even use coamoxiclav and cefpodoxime in pregnant women. You avoid fluoroquinolones because it may cause cardiac birth defects. The trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole is contraindicated in the first and third trimester. And in near term, so around the third trimester, nitrofurantoin is or should be avoided. Although these drugs are relatively effective also in urinary tract infections in other clinical scenarios. Recurrent UTI, meanwhile, is defined as three or more culture-documented episodes of acute uncomplicated cystitis within the past 12 months, or two or more episodes in a 6-month period. So when you should investigate further, you should screen a patient, meaning you have to do a urine culture if one, there's no response to appropriate antibiotic, there's persistent microscopic hematuria, presence of obstructive symptoms, persistent infection, presence of a urea splitting organism like a proteus. So you have to do pelvic examination, renal ultrasound or CT sonogram, and referral to urology if you're suspecting anatomical urologic abnormalities. Now, before initiating, and then you have to consider also the frequency and pattern of the infection, the lifestyle of the patient, compliance and willingness to commit to any particular aspects of management. If there are plans for pregnancy, previous resistance and susceptibility patterns, not just of the patient's urine culture, but also you have to consider the institutional resistance and susceptibility patterns. And if the patient have any history or adverse events or allergies to particular antibiotics. So there are before initiating a pharmacologic prophylaxis, you must first counsel the patient on behavioral modifications and attempt these non-pharmacological measures. Some of these are proper anterior to posterior cleansing. So dapat palikod when you will wipe uh, the urethral area, urination post-coitus, there's importance of liberal fluid intake, avoid tight-fitting underwear, and switch away from spermicidal contraceptives if uh, there's a use of such birth control method. Um, there are non-antibiotic options that can be given. So, for postmenopausal women, intravaginal estriol cream or estradiol vaginal ring can restore the protective vaginal flora. Immunoprophylaxis, although it's not that commonly available locally, is also an option. But the problem is availability even in Metro Manila. So one of the common management for these individuals would be the antibiotic prophylaxis. So there are three strategies: the continuous low dose, the intermittent patient-initiated therapy at the first signs of symptoms, meaning if the patient have urinary symptoms, the patient will take the antibiotic right away. And then there's a post-coital prophylaxis if UTIs are clearly associated with sexual intercourse. So again, you have to consider frequency and pattern, lifestyle and compliance, and plans for pregnancy. So for can either give these medications. The postcoital are the following. So the fluoroquinolones, nitrofurantoin, cotrimoxazole, and even cephalexin. For the intermittent prophylaxis, it's nitrofurantoin, cotrimoxazole, and the fluoroquinolones, the norfloxacin and ciprofloxacin. Now, acute pyelonephritis, meanwhile, is an upper urinary tract infection, which has ascended to involve the renal parenchyma. So this is a different clinical entity from cystitis, which would demand more aggressive evaluation and treatment. Some of its clinical features would be the presence of fever, more than 38 degrees centigrade with chills, flank pain and costovertebral angle tenderness. So this is very important when you do your physical examination. Presence of nausea and vomiting. There could still be presence of the lower urinary tract symptoms. And then on the routine urinalysis, there would be a significant amount of pyuria. And on culture would be presence of bacteriuria of more than or equal to 10,000 colony forming units per ml. So it's very important to do urinalysis and gram stain and culture. Or and these are based on the clinical practice guidelines. If the patient is septic, you can also request for a blood culture and sensitivity. Biomarkers, mga inflammatory biomarkers are not recommended. Imaging is not needed initially unless you pick up in the history that would suspect that the patient could have neurologic abnormalities or anatomic abnormal anomalies that can be seen by imaging. You would also consider if the patient is still febrile for more than 3 days, even with antibiotic administration, patient's history of kidney stones or urolithiasis, or a highly alkaline urine of greater than or equal to 7. So, what are the treatment options? You can still treat acute uncomplicated pyelonephritis in the outpatient setting as long as the patient can tolerate the oral medications, the patient doesn't have any clinical features of sepsis, and the patient is able to still eat and relatively stable in condition. So you can give fluoroquinolones, ciprofloxacin, levofloxacin, and ofloxacin. Alternatives would be if the patient has poor tolerance to fluoroquinolones or maybe previous resistance to fluoroquinolones, you can give cefixime or cefuroxime, which are cephalosporins. For inpatient, you can give ceftriaxone, ciprofloxacin, or amikacin. If you're suspecting that the patient has multi-drug resistance or the presence of extended spectrum beta-lactamases, ertapenem and piperacillin tazobactam are given. Uh, and you assess the patient for around 3 to 4 days. If the patient becomes a febrile and becomes clinically stable, and then you, based on the culture results that you would get from the patient, you can switch it to an appropriate oral antibiotic. Now, for acute uncomplicated cystitis, so again, these are premenopausal non-pregnant women with urinary symptoms of dysuria, frequency, urgency, with or without gross hematuria. But very important here, patient doesn't have any vaginal discharge or any complicating conditions. So these are the symptoms. And then again, clinical diagnosis would be sufficient and urinalysis is not needed to start treatment. Pre-treatment cultures are not recommended. And based on the updated guidelines, so nitrofurantoin and fosfomycin are the first line oral medications for acute uncomplicated cystitis. You give nitrofurantoin 100 milligram 4 times a day for 5 days, or fosfomycin 3 gram single dose. So they have good efficacy, and in the latest resistance patterns, they have still have high susceptibility rates to E. coli and other common UTI-related microorganisms. You can give cephalosporins or beta-lactams as an alternative or trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole. But you have to, as much as possible, avoid this, especially if there is a high resistance in the institution or in the community. So if there is proven susceptibility for the cotrimoxazole, you can give cotrimoxazole as an alternative. Again, very important, you have to give the amoxicillin with clavulanic acid, not just a standalone amoxicillin, because the resistance for amoxicillin for E. coli is about 80% locally. So also, do not use fluoroquinolones as a first line for uncomplicated cystitis because you want to avoid the collateral damage, meaning using high-powered antibiotics for simple infections because this promotes bacterial resistance and disrupts the local microbiome of the urinary tract. So avoid overkill, particularly in cases of acute uncomplicated cystitis. So how about in special populations? So approach differs in these particular special groups. So let's start among elderly women. Um, Duration of the treatment is generally the same as general population. Some elderly women would still present with the classic urinary symptoms, whether it's an acute accomplished cystitis or the pyelonephritis. But there would be some would only have non-specific symptoms, maybe presence of fever, loss of appetite, generalized weakness. So because these elderly women would have tendency to have less compliance in medications. Short course or antibiotics given 3 to 6 days is roughly equivalent to long course treatment. So you can give a shorter course of antibiotics in these cases. Um, And then, if for some reason a urine culture was tested, but the patient doesn't have any urinary symptoms or symptoms that would make you suspect presence of UTI, you do not routinely treat asymptomatic bacteriuria unless the patient will undergo a urologic procedure. Then you have to give the appropriate antibiotic for that elderly patient. Um, Also, treatment does not reduce morbidity and mortality among asymptomatic elderly patients, and it could even increase the risk of adverse drug events, Clostridium difficile colitis, and antibiotic resistance. Now, for males, again, all males should be considered complicated UTI, except if there is a presence of only isolated lower urinary tract symptoms. You need to rule out urologic abnormality. So you have to do also imaging of the urinary tract. Even KUB ultrasound would be an initial imaging of choice for males. Urine culture is definitely required. And there is a preference to use fluoroquinolones as the first line because of its good tissue penetration into the prostate and the urinary tract. And it should be given around 1 to 2 weeks. Again, your recurrent UTI, it could be a reinfection, which is the most common, or a relapse, meaning an infection from the same organism. So urine culture and urologic evaluation is important. And we mentioned also the prophylaxis, whether it's a pharmacologic or the non-pharmacologic ways of preventing recurrent UTI. Catheter-associated UTI, meanwhile, is one of the most common nosocomial infection. So, if possible, you remove or replace catheter. Treat only if it is symptomatic. Um, and we will go into further details later on catheter-associated UTI. But first, we'll go to a specific type of urinary tract infection among men, which is prostatitis. So there are two main types, the acute bacterial and the chronic bacterial prostatitis. So acute bacterial prostatitis, its prevalence is around 1 to 3%. It affects the sexually active young men or older men with the benign prostatic hypertrophy. The most common microorganism is still E. coli, followed by Klebsiella, Pseudomonas, and Enterococcus. So it can present with high-grade fever, severe pelvic and perineal pain, irritative lower urinary tract symptoms, and even obstructive lower urinary tract symptoms, particularly urine retention. The patient may also complain of severe muscle pain and body weakness. Um, these patients often look very sick as compared to the chronic bacterial prostatitis, although its prevalence is much higher, around 10%. And it has a higher recurrence as compared to acute bacterial prostatitis. Um, Patients that have prior acute prostatitis episodes, recurrent UTI or sexually transmitted infections, or those with recent urologic procedures are at risk in developing chronic bacterial prostatitis. Patients with anatomic anomalies also are prone to chronic bacterial prostatitis, in addition to benign prostatic hypertrophy, presence of urethral stricture, and intraprostatic ductal reflux would be very important. Again, the same organisms are also involved in a chronic bacterial prostatitis, but the difference would be fever is not common. The perineal pain is milder or less severe as compared to the acute bacterial prostatitis. Lower urinary tract symptoms is milder, but most of these patients would have hesitancy or weak stream as its main urinary symptoms. They're usually well looking, so less toxic, and then but they would have more presence of the ejaculatory symptoms, either painful ejaculation or they note blood, no, when the sperm is expressed out of the reproductive organ, or what you call hematospermia. So for treatment, acute bacterial prostatitis, the first line would be IV fluoroquinolones or IV aminoglycoside plus an ampicillin for 2 to 4 weeks. Alternatives would be the cotrimoxazole intravenously or the extended spectrum penicillins. If urinary retention develops, you have to do a suprapubic catheter. Presence of abscess, you have to immediately do surgical drainage. And since these patients would have commonly would present also with sepsis, urinary retention, and in certain cases, those immunocompromised individuals, um, these are important factors that you should advise the patient to have hospitalization. Also in order to give the intravenous or parenteral antibiotics. In cases of fever, you give antipyretics such as paracetamol. Important fluid management is crucial also, particularly if there is sepsis, and pain control is also part as an adjunctive management for acute bacterial prostatitis. So for chronic bacterial prostatitis, you can give oral fluoroquinolone if the patient can tolerate it, but it of a much longer duration, 4 to 6 weeks. Oral cotrimoxazole and doxycycline are the alternative antibiotics for this case. Um, Unlike in acute bacterial prostatitis, wherein you need to insert a suprapubic catheter, which is relatively invasive, you can give an alpha blocker or such as tamsulosin if the patient has retention symptoms. Um, Abscess is also uncommon or even rare in chronic bacterial prostatitis, but definitely, if present, would also warrant surgical drainage and admission. You would give also non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, or you can give yung finasteride or dutasteride also as adjunctive treatment for chronic bacterial prostatitis. So now, it was also mentioned in Harrison, two severe and important conditions that would represent the extreme spectrum of upper urinary tract infection. These are the Centrogranulomatous pyelonephritis and the emphysematous pyelonephritis. So let's go first with Centrogranulomatous pyelonephritis. Um, this is a chronic destructive granulomatous inflammation of the renal parenchyma, which is pathologically characterized with lipid-laden macrophages, replacing the functioning tissue. It is almost always associated with an obstructing calculi, as you would see here, this very intense. So this is the um, left kidney. So you can see this one shouldn't be present. So this very intense white substance here that's located in the kidney is a obstructive calculi. And as you can see, there is a presence of hydronephrosis, which would signify obstruction at the level of the kidneys. So most likely this is a Staghorn calculi, and we will discuss Staghorn calculi later when we talk about kidney stones. So usually this is present predominantly among middle-aged women. Um, it would present with recurrent urinary tract infection, flank pain, and weight loss. It's very this is usually would also present with unilateral and non-functioning kidney. And in half of the cases, on physical examination, you would be able to have a palpable mass when you do your routine abdominal examination. The gold standard for the examination of centrogranulomatous pyelonephritis would be, again, computed tomography. You have to check for presence of enlarged kidney. This one is enlarged compared to this particular kidney. There's a presence of the calculi, and then the bare paw. Because of the hypodense bare paw masses, which represent hydronephrosis, meaning there is the inability of the urine going out of the from the kidneys to the lower urinary tract. Therefore, it causes the expansion of that particular kidney and giving that appearance, no, when you do a CT scan. Again, E. coli would be the most common microorganism that's involved, but Proteus mirabilis is also a common microorganism. You treat this with nephrectomy and antibiotics as well. You have to give antibiotics pre-operatively. In contrast, the emphysematous pyelonephritis is a different and far more urgent situation. It is a life-threatening, necrotizing infection with gas-forming organisms in the renal parenchyma or the perirenal tissue. It occurs in diabetics in over 90% of cases because the elevated glucose provides a substrate for the fermentation and gas formation. It has a more dramatic presentation. It's usually present in a poorly controlled diabetic with fever, flank pain. There is rapid clinical deterioration leading to septic shock. And depending on the literature, mortality ranges from 3.7 to 50%. So there is a classification that is used uh, using the CT scan. So as you can see here, there's a gas. So this is again a normal kidney, if you will see here in the right kidney, but the left kidney, there is seems to be the obliteration of the one part of the kidney because of the presence of this gas, this black density that you can see here, which is obviously when you compare here, there is none. These are normal bowel gases. But around the kidney, there should be no presence of that air pockets that can be seen in the bowels. But here, as you can see, it already overlaps a significant part of the renal parenchyma. So, depending now on the severity and the extent of the presence of that gas, um, it is classified from class 1 to 4. Now, the class 4 would be the most severe and would have a graver prognosis. So, the management here would be giving IV antibiotics uh, and percutaneous drainage. But for the severe ones, class 3 to 4, definitely nephrectomy is also is indicated and to facilitate a much more faster recovery from the infection. Going back to the catheter-associated UTI, again, it's the most common nosocomial infection. It is defined by the presence of an indwelling urinary catheter in place for more than 2 consecutive days, or a catheter that was used at any time during the period in which the symptoms appeared, or even if the catheter was removed the day before the development of urinary symptoms. So the patients would present with, again, elevated temperature of more than 30 degrees centigrade, presence of tenderness in the suprapubic area, costovertebral angle tenderness, and urinary symptoms of urgency, frequency, and dysuria. So urine culture is definitely indicated, particularly if it is symptomatic, and if we're also contemplating a urologic procedure among these individuals. The cutoff here would be more than 1,000 colony-forming units per ml of urine. So this is a much more smaller threshold, no, as compared to the asymptomatic bacteriuria that we've discussed earlier in pregnant women. So management, as if possible, the catheter should be removed because again that catheter or foreign body is a promotes a nidus of growth of that microorganism. So removing it would facilitate much more faster resolution of the microorganisms. First line antibiotics would include ceftriaxone, ciprofloxacin, gentamicin, and amikacin. Uh, and then there should be an emphasis on preventive care, meaning there should be an aseptic technique when inserting the Foley catheter. As much as possible, it is a closed drainage system, so you have to avoid any leaks or openings from the attachment site of the urinary catheter up to the drainage. You have to empty the urine bag regularly, and when you're handling the Foley catheter or the urinary catheter, it's important also to practice good hand hygiene. Now, urinary tract obstruction is also important in relation to UTI because UTI with presence of obstruction is an emergency because it can create rapid sepsis and irreversible kidney damage. So, we will not discuss children, but among adults, the most common would be benign prostatic hypertrophy, kidney stones, urethral stricture, and pelvic tumors. But there are also other causes as well, such as lymphoma, neurogenic bladder, and the intake of anticholinergic drugs. So the pathophysiology here is that if there's a presence of significant urinary tract obstruction, there is an increased hydrostatic pressure that would lead to the tubular dysfunction. So uh, in the few days of the obstruction, it can cause increased renal blood flow, but ironically, there is a decrease in the glomerular filtration rate. And the patient could also present with pain because of the distension of the capsule, because of the buildup of the urine that is unable to go out and go to the lower urinary tract. If the obstruction is left untreated or not addressed, so there is now a much more progressive decline of the glomerular filtration rate. It leads to the atrophy of the renal parenchyma, and there is the development of renal fibrosis. So, metabolic complications would include the presence of hyperkalemic, hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. The patient could have nephrogenic diabetes insipidus due to the insensitivity of the vasopressin, and patient could also present with elevated blood pressure due to increase in renin as part of the hemodynamic changes from urinary tract obstruction. So the first step would be you insert a bladder catheter or even a Foley catheter, depending on the level of the urinary tract obstruction that the patient has. An important or an immediate imaging test that can be performed easily would be abdominal ultrasound, since more than 90% of the time, there's a possibility that you could detect um, the cause of the urinary tract obstruction. But still, the gold standard, if you're considering, for example, a kidney stone would be a non-contrast uh, computerized tomography. If infection is present, you have to relieve the obstruction urgently. So you can perform nephrostomy or ureteral stenting. And then you have to do, or you have to give IV antibiotics for these patients. Um, After relief of the bilateral obstruction, if it is a bilateral obstruction, there is a possibility or phenomenon called post-obstructive diuresis, wherein if at start or even prior to the management of the obstruction, there is oliguria or decreased urine output. Now the patient now overcompensates because of the relief of that obstruction, leading to a massive polyuria, which is of a hypotonic urine. This happens because of the effect of the urea as an osmotic diuretic, the presence of the natriuretic peptides, and the tubular dysfunction that we've mentioned as part of the hemodynamic changes. So it's very important to monitor the patient's urine output and the serum and urine electrolytes and the osmolality uh, regularly. You have to replace it not with the normal saline, but relatively a hypotonic saline, 0.45%. So because you want to avoid hypovolemia or hypotension. But in case hypovolemia and hypotension happens, you can give the physiologic saline, the 0.9% sodium chloride as an IV fluid to in order to manage the hypovolemia or hypotension among these individuals. Okay, so now we'll just discuss a bit about antimicrobial resistance data. So annually, the infectious disease society in our country releases the local microorganism antibiotic resistance. So, but the latest that I was able to see was the 2021 surveillance. So let's just look into these numbers. Sorry for the typo here. So the red one represents the updated one, and the orange one would be this one was in I think this was is in 2020. So cotrimoxazole has one of the highest resistance rates, almost two-thirds of outpatient urine specimens. So we're not dealing here with inpatient individuals, but outpatient urine specimens. So this is the reason why cotrimoxazole is not the first line management for urinary tract infection, particularly acute uncomplicated cystitis. And you should avoid giving cotrimoxazole in cases of uncomplicated cystitis. Ciprofloxacin, as we've mentioned earlier, because of the aggressive um, overkill of giving fluoroquinolones even in acute uncomplicated cystitis, if you would compare in 2011, it's just the resistance is just 5.6%. That now half of the specimens that were isolated uh, is resistant to ciprofloxacin. Where uh, this is difficult because you can give ciprofloxacin as an indication for other infectious diseases, but because of the presence of resistance, it's very difficult now for any individual to be given ciprofloxacin and would lead to an immediate relief. Ampicillin also has a very high resistance, no? So 64%. So ampicillin, this forms the basis again of the guidelines that you don't use ampicillin as one of the first line medications, no, for urinary tract infection. For So nitrofurantoin has been relatively low, but if you've seen that almost doubling of the resistance, so we have to continuously monitor that. Coamoxiclab, it also relatively doubled from 11.6 to 24.5%. Cefuroxime um, had a six-fold increase of resistance, while cefuroxime is still a first-line management for certain urinary tract infections. This should also warrant a very careful routine examination and review, no, by our infectious disease specialist. For fosfomycin, as the latest would be there's still a 0% resistance, no, for E. coli. So therefore, fosfomycin is one of those antibiotics that are used as first-line management for acute uncomplicated cystitis. So in summary, so again, let's put some important points here. So acute uncomplicated cystitis, it's nitrofurantoin or fosfomycin. Avoid fluoroquinolones because of the collateral damage. For acute uncomplicated pyelonephritis, you need to get urine culture. You can give oral fluoroquinolone if the patient is relatively stable. But if the patient needs hospitalization, you have to give a parenteral ceftriaxone, fluoroquinolone, or aminoglycoside. For pregnant women, very important, you screen them at 9 to 17th week, particularly in the 4th month, and you treat the patient even if there are no symptoms. So again, the cutoff would be more than 100,000 per, excuse me, colony forming units per ml. Antibiotics that are safe include cephalosporin, fosfomycin. You avoid fluoroquinolone and cotrimoxazole. You don't use ampicillin or amoxicillin alone because of high resistant rates, or even the cotrimoxazole for urinary tract infection in our setting. You admit acute pyelonephritis with these clinical scenarios. For urinary tract obstruction, there should be a immediate relief of that obstruction, particularly if there is infection, because you have to avoid or manage the sepsis. If the patient would you suspect presence of kidney stones, you do a non-contrast CT scan, and you have to manage post-obstructive diuresis if in case it happens, no, once the obstruction is resolved. Post-treatment culture, if for acute uncomplicated cystitis, it is not needed, but it is needed for acute pyelonephritis in pregnancy and in recurrent or complicated cases. So this wraps up our formal content. So again, I zeroed in on Harrison's and our local clinical practice guidelines for this lecture. So if you have questions, I would entertain them later on. So again, thank you for listening.